Hello from a very, very chilly southwest. It is currently -2 degrees and the marina outside my house is actually frozen over. I have literally never seen that happen in the 8 years that we've lived here now. And I'm not ashamed to say I'm sat here with a Nana blanket. Sometimes just needs must. So I've come here today to talk about a subject that is very close to my heart, and that is burnout prevention. So some of you will know me from my social media over on Instagram, which is where I'm most active. And every Sunday I have a feature called the Sunday Surgery, where people can ask me questions anonymously about burnout, career dilemmas, mental well-being, that sort of stuff. And one of the questions I had this week was my top tips for burnout prevention. And I thought that this needed a little bit more attention than what it got, which was just a single slide on my Instagram stories, because burnout prevention is a huge topic and it's something that is really, really worth knowing about, because burnout prevention is better than cure. I talk about this all the time. Do not underestimate how long it takes to get over burnout. Do not underestimate how complicated it is and how multifaceted it has to be as well. In fact, there are some studies that suggest that you never ever get over burnout once you've got it. I'm not sure that that's 100% true, but that's what some of the data suggests. On average, it's 1 to 3 years to recover, and you probably need an average of 3.5 months off work as well if you really want to recover properly. Some people take up to a year. Burnout does a huge number on your brain's structure, function, on your neuroendocrine hormones, on your body's physiology, and it takes a very long time to correct that, and you need to make changes in multiple domains of your life in order to sustain your recovery as well. So like anything in medicine, prevention is so much better than cure. But we have a couple of problems when it comes to burnout prevention. The first one is the systems that cause burnout. So you can't talk about burnout prevention without talking about the things that cause burnout in the first place. And by definition, burnout occurs when you have been subjected to uncontrolled pressure at work for a prolonged period of time that has not been successfully managed. You do not burn out without undue pressure at work. And so if you're really talking about prevention, you have to go to the source of the problem, which is either a toxic workplace culture or inherent problems in the way that you are working and expected to work by your organisation. I suppose what that really comes down to is how much of burnout is the fault or the responsibility of the individual. And I think whilst there might be individual risk factors that people carry with them that predispose them to burnout or might precipitate their burnout, without that undue pressure at work, you don't end up burnt out anyway. So whilst there are certainly things you have to tackle as an individual to prevent your burnout and also to recover from burnout, ultimately it is toxic workplaces that cause it. And so if you're talking about prevention, you have to look at the bigger picture. This is something that really frustrates me and is something that I am on a mission to change myself. I've just got a role as an NHS clinical entrepreneur, and I'm about to start a role providing some consultancy for delivering of mental wellbeing projects for NHS staff. And what I want is to try to change the system from the inside out. I appreciate that this is going to be incredibly difficult to do in the NHS, but I want to give it a go because the NHS is just an absolute disaster at the moment. That's not the subject of today's talk. Let's park that to one side for a minute. So yeah, that's the first thing to say about burnout prevention, is that you cannot talk about prevention without tackling problems at work. The other thing to say about burnout prevention is that it is incredibly difficult to know. If you haven't experienced burnout before, if you haven't been taught about it, it's very, very difficult to know if it's happening to you. And this is exactly what happened to me, right? So it took about 6 months from me going from being completely fully functional, never having a mental health problem in my entire life, to being in a burnout crisis and having a mental health crisis. So in that 6-month period, things were gradually getting worse, and I knew that something was wrong, but I was still turning up to work and performing adequately enough at my job. And even though my head was becoming more and more desperate and more exhausting to live in, plus the fact that I was starting to develop physical symptoms, I didn't recognise it for what it was. And as a result, I ended up in a burnout crisis. And as I've said, it's so much harder to come back from a burnout crisis than it is to get yourself on that slide into burnout. So when we're talking about burnout prevention, we have to talk about ways in which you can recognize that you're starting to slide. This is really, really important. So it's about recognizing that slide into burnout, and then it's also about what measures can you put in place, both as an individual and at work, to help prevent you from burning out. So we've already talked about how hard it is to make changes to prevent burnout when you're working in clunky and dysfunctional organisations like the NHS at the moment, for instance. And whilst I personally believe that we need to change the systems and not necessarily the people within it, when it comes to burnout prevention, there are some things that you can do at work to help yourself and your team members as well from burning out. The number one thing that I recommend is peer support. So this peer support has a really good evidence base both in burnout prevention and in burnout recovery. It is essential that you have a psychologically safe space to debrief and talk through any issues that you've got at work. And by what I mean by having a psychologically safe space is having a space where you are free to talk about the problems that you have without fear of being reprimanded or getting into trouble for doing so. It's really, really important that you have that opportunity. Not only does that prevent burnout, it also increases up your individual resilience. So it's something that's really, really worthwhile doing. It doesn't matter how you get this peer support. You can do it, in real life. You can do it online. It doesn't matter how you get it, as long as you are getting that opportunity regularly. That will help you to prevent your burnout. The other really interesting thing about peer support is that if you socialise with your peers, that also increases up team resilience and prevents burnout as well. So it's not just about offering a space to unload that's safe for people to do so, it's also about socialising with your peers and your colleagues and having fun with them. That helps to build bonds and to allow you to get to know your teammates. Let's face it, we spend a lot of time at work, probably more than we actually spend with our own family and our loved ones. So you can see how forming those bonds and having those social relationships, those social connections, can really help prevent burnout. Let's talk about what you can do as an individual to help prevent yourself from burning out. So my take on this is that if you have really robust stress management skills and coping strategies, then that's going to protect you from burnout for longer. There are lots of things that we know are evidence-based when it comes to stress management. What I would say about burnout prevention, however, is that anything that is to do with mindfulness in self-isolation or self-care in isolation isn't going to cut the mustard. And we see this played out in the literature as well. So whatever it is that you're doing has to be more than just doing your own self-care and doing a bit of mindfulness. I know this from a personal point of view as well, because I have done yoga for many, many years, and a regular yoga practice, which is how I get, some movement in and practice meditation and getting into a state of flow. That wasn't enough to prevent me from burning out. So I have personal experience of this. It's also what's borne out in the data. So when you're thinking about prevention of burnout, it has to be more robust than self-care alone. What evidence-based burnout prevention looks like, it looks like all the usual stuff that we normally tell people as doctors, so I'm a GP, to do when it comes to managing your mood. And a lot of what we tell patients to do who've got kind of mild to moderate anxiety or depression will also help in burnout prevention. So that's things like regular movement and exercise, eating nutritiously, getting some sunlight every day, making sure that you've got an opportunity to connect with others. Those things are really important. However, when it comes to burnout prevention, as I've said, those things alone are not going to be sufficient. You also have to have measures that you put in place to protect yourself emotionally and mentally from being drained and being exhausted at work. So the sorts of things that I would normally recommend would be things like implementing professional boundaries. So that might be things like not looking at your emails outside of your working hours, making sure that you're taking your breaks. So when it comes to taking your breaks at work, regular breaks throughout the working day are better for burnout prevention and recovery compared to one long break in the middle of the day. But obviously that depends on your job being flexible enough for you to be able to do that. Maintaining your professional boundaries is incredibly difficult, particularly if you are on the slide into burnout, because it's a very, very vulnerable time and it's really hard to advocate for yourself when you are burnt out. So when it comes to maintaining your boundaries, sometimes it's helpful to have some stock phrases available to you so that if someone challenges your boundaries, then you've got a few things that you can say. So a good example of that might be, thanks for that, do you mind if I come back to you later? Or, I'm just going to give that some thought. So those are kind of holding phrases. So if someone is challenging your boundaries, for instance, you know, they want you to take on an extra project, you don't really have the resource to be able to do that right now. Sometimes just stalling gives you some time to really think about how you're going to respond to that request and whether or not you can reasonably meet it. I think it's also really important, if you can, to stop yourself from burning out, to have a really good boundary between work and home. So as I said, for some people that's about maintaining professional boundaries, not looking at emails, not checking your phone, not being on a WhatsApp group where you're being disturbed out of hours, for instance. You know, turn off those notifications, like have that separation between your work and your home life. Some people do this thing called completing the stress cycle. So this is talked about a lot in the Burnout book by the Nagoski sisters, which by the way is amazing and I highly recommend that you have a read. So it's basically a ritualized behavior that you do every single time that you finish work. And in repeating it, what happens is your body then learns to recognize that when you do that particular behavior or act, that it is time to relax, and your body goes into kind of relaxation mode, like it kind of dampens down the flight or fight response. So for some people that might mean coming in the front door, having a cup of tea, having a shower, putting on a fresh set of clothes. For myself, I like to exercise, so I either like to go for a walk or do a workout. One of the other things I like to do is to paint my nails, because I can't have my nails painted at work, and for me that's like the ultimate act of rebellion, sticking some nail polish on. For some people those things are not accessible. So if that's not accessible to you, one of the things that you can do is you can just lie down either in your bed or on the floor or on a sofa and just lie there with your eyes closed and clench every single muscle, hold, and then relax. And just repeat that until you feel your mind start to quieten down and you feel all of that tension coming out of your body. Then if you repeat whatever behaviour or act that you've chosen every time that you finish work, eventually your body will recognise that as a signal to start to relax, and it becomes a really effective way of signalling to yourself that your work stress is over. The aim of that is to stop that work stress spilling over into your personal life, and is really, really crucial for burnout prevention. Okay, so we've covered some of the stuff that you can do at work to help prevent burnout, and I've also talked a little bit about the things that you can do to help with your stress levels at home as well. So now what I'm going to do is talk about the importance of monitoring your stress levels. So as I said, when I slid into burnout, I had no idea what was happening. I wasn't monitoring how I was thinking, how I was feeling. And had I been doing that, if I had some sort of reflective practice, I would have seen that slide into burnout. So one of the key ways of preventing burnout is catching it before you get to a burnout crisis. So journaling is evidence-based to help improve your mental health, and I think it's really, really helpful to develop a regular journaling practice and a regular reflective practice so that you can monitor your stress levels. One of the tools that I recommend that you use is something called the stress continuum. Now, I've done a couple of YouTube shorts on the stress continuum, so go and have a quick look at my shorts. It's the one with the green screen behind and I'm in front of it talking. It's got a green column, a yellow column, an orange column and a red column. And what you do is you use the stress continuum in your regular practice, ideally several times a week, and you just kind of document where you're at with your mood at this particular point in time. And what you'll see over time is that if you are sliding into burnout, that you will be able to pick up that slide because you'll be moving between the coloured columns, so you'll be moving towards the red side of the table. That then is a warning for you to get help sooner rather than later and before you reach a burnout crisis. So using the stress continuum is a really helpful way of doing that, but you don't have to use the stress continuum. There are lots of different ways that you can document how you're feeling, lots of different tools that can be used. That's just one such example. The key here is that you're developing a regular practice and that you're regularly checking in with yourself and that you have a way of picking up when things are consistently getting harder for you. So there we have it. Those are my top tips for burnout prevention. We've talked about how you can prevent people from burning out in the first place by changing the systems that we work under and toxic working culture. We've talked about what you can do at work in your working day and also within your teams to prevent burnout, plus what you can do for yourself and how to monitor your stress levels so that you don't end up burning out and ending up in a burnout crisis. I hope that has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've got any other suggestions about how to prevent burnout. I'll also link to my Facebook group and my Instagram and my TikTok, and also my website. I have a burnout recovery course, and I also offer burnout coaching and recovery mentoring if that's something that you're interested in. Until next time, take care and I'll see you soon.